Welcome to the Fathering Strong podcast, where we celebrate the incredible journeys of fathers who are making a difference. Hosted by Urban Light Ministry President and author, Pastor Eli Williams. Each week, we'll hear from an inspiring guest who will share their unique fatherhood story. We'll discuss the challenges, triumphs, and lessons learned along the way, offering valuable insights and encouragement for all dads. Join us as we explore the power of fatherhood and build a brighter future for our families.
Hello and welcome to a new edition of the Fathering Strong podcast. Eli Williams here, and I have as my very special guest, Kevin McCready. Kevin is just a man that's full of some wonderful experience and wisdom. I'm sure you're going to enjoy hearing from this man who is an educator, he's an administrator, he is a pastor, he's a bishop. I could just go on and on. We'll stop there and let you tell your own story. Welcome.
Please. Well, thank you, sir. Thank you for being here, and certainly excited for the opportunity to join you all in this program.
Thank you.
And certainly to commend you on the job that you're doing here in the city of Springfield and beyond.
Thank you.
And I know that today, like all other days, we're hoping and praying that will be a blessing as well. So,
I'm confident that it will.
Yeah.
I'm going to start, as we usually do with our guests, and ask you about your fatherhood story. What was life growing up as little Kevin in the McCraney household?
Well, that's a long journey. 65 years old now. But we begin in Boston, Massachusetts, in Roxbury, which, if you do your research, was at one time the highest neighborhood in the United States for drug and for crimes. And so that's the environment that I was born into. And in the early years of my life, like many of the other kids in that neighborhood, that's what framed our mindset. My dad was there, my mother was there. Dad was a hard worker, but unfortunately, he had the disease of alcoholism, and one of Dad's biggest drawbacks from that was he was violent. When he wasn't drinking, he was Clark Kent. But when he was drinking, he was something far worse. And so not only was there violence outside in the neighborhood and in the world outside of the home, but there was violence inside the home as well. And I was telling you a while back, my father passed away in 2001, and I only saw my dad sober maybe twice in my life. So the violence and the violent dad was really the dad that I knew. And so that created I think on a real serious level, when you're young and you're coming up and you're an open book, and many of the things that you are exposed to, I think, leave their imprint on you. And so violence became very common, very normal. It was a way of expressing your manhood and all of these kinds of things. And so in 67, I was like 6 or so, and my mom decided that she wanted a better life for me, and she didn't feel that environment would lead to that. So one day I came home and Mom was ironing the clothes, and she said, go in your room and get your stuff. And when I did and came out, a taxi pulled up, and me and Mom got in the taxi while Dad was at work. And and we headed to Akron, Ohio, that's where my mother was from. And so now that that created a whole nother dynamic because, like I said earlier, Dad was a good provider. Mom didn't work. Dad was a good provider. So now at I think 28, with a 7-year-old son, Mom had to, in a new city. Mom had to, she had to grind out a living for us.
Yeah.
And it was difficult. We started off in my grandfather's garage. He remodeled his garage. We moved from there to my mother's brother and his wife. We lived with them for a while. Then we finally moved up to the projects.
Moved up to the projects.
Yeah, we moved up to the projects, and we lived there with my aunt and her 4 boys. And so every stop that we made was a new neighborhood, was a new household, was a new school system, and so, the early part of my life was change, and it didn't really settle in until, I got 14 or so, and then things kind of start to level out. But in between that time, Dad would pop up every now and then, he would, and I always knew he was there because it would be a lot of ruckus in the house around 2 and 3 in the morning, because he wouldn't come during the day, but he'd come.
He would show up intoxicated.
He would show up intoxicated, and Mom didn't want to let him in, and there's a whole big rigmarole, and so that's how I knew Dad was there because of that, and of course. From time to time, he would call and say, "I'm coming to get you, and we're going to go out and do this." And so I, like most kids, Dad was your hero. I would sit in the window and wait for him to show up, and Mom didn't want to tell me that he wasn't coming, so she would let me sit there. And when it got late, she would go, let's maybe he'll come tomorrow. I'm like, no, he's coming today, And if I had money for the times I fell asleep in the window waiting for Dad to come, I'd be able to buy your car.
Yeah.
Did you get that? If I had the money, I'd be able to buy your car.
Well, that wouldn't be much. But anyway, I get your point.
So, when I think of my dad, much of my history and much of my thoughts are surrounded around disappointment, absenteeism, and when he was there, my dad was very physical. He was, he boxed professionally, and he was very good, and so he was always intent on making me be a man, so it was always the punching and the physicality and all of these things, and so there was a lot of pain. He would always say, make a muscle, and when I would make the muscle, then he would hit me in the muscle and make a frog, and then he would say, it's not a muscle till it hurts. And you're not a man until you can deal with pain. So these were the kinds of things that, that framed my concept of dad and fatherhood. I wrestled when I got into junior high school. In high school, I wrestled and was very good. Was a city champ a couple of years, and I boxed. Golden Glove, pretty good. And I remember after the matches, the other kids would look up in the stands and Mom or Dad would be there. Well, my mom was working, so Mom couldn't be there. Dad wasn't there. And so I found it interesting that one of the things that is amazing about children, they can adapt. to the most difficult circumstances.
Very resilient.
Yeah, and I learned early that the way to minimize disappointment is to eliminate expectation. So if I didn't expect anybody to be there, then I wouldn't be disappointed when they didn't show up. And so these are the kinds of things that you deal with to help you cope.
Sure.
And I remember when I turned 16, I had seen my dad a scattered few times from the time we left when I was 6 or 7 till the time I got 16. But when I turned 16, I was 6'1" now, and I was feeling pretty good about myself athletically, and you had adapted to a lot of things, but I had some anger problems, which affected me in school.
No surprise.
In school and all that, yeah, and I was kind of like a lone wolf, which is understandable. But Dad called and he said, "I'm coming to get you, and we're gonna go out and celebrate your 16th birthday. You're a man now." And my mother was like, "Are you sure you want to do this?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I want to go out with Dad." And my mother had got into church, and so my life was different now because the church had become a part and the nucleus of our life. And so, I had learned that there was a better way of living. There were different kinds of people. That life was not made up of predator and prey.
Let me ask you a question about that.
Yeah.
Were there men in the church that kind of represented for you a different way to be a man?
Yes, there were. The pastor of the church was always very kind and very embracing. And there were other men who were very much involved in my athletic ventures. I was good in sports, and so they would ask me about it, and they would come every now and then. And of course, there were other young people my age, and so
in the church.
Yes. And so if I was involved in something that their kids were involved in, then I was like a part of that group.
Yeah.
And so that was very helpful. And it was a stark difference from Roxbury, where you sat around and waited for somebody to prey upon, so while that was good and that was helpful on the one hand, I think on the other hand, maybe even subconsciously, it kind of agitated an already sensitive area because it exposed what I didn't have.
Because you can't miss what you've never experienced, now you've experienced it.
Yeah, and it's like, they were good. My grandfather, Reverend Otis Spencer, God bless, he called me champ, and he was from Forsyth, Georgia, and he was a sharecropper, and he had an 8th grade education, but he had tons of wisdom, and he would come over and get us, and he had an asphalt business, and he would get us up early and tell our mothers and boys need to go to work, and so he taught us work ethics. Mm-hmm. And my mother, even when my dad was there, my mother was always the disciplinarian. So I got away with nothing. And I think she was even tougher because Dad wasn't there. And she was not the huggy type. My mother was not that type. So, every once in a while she would say, "Boy, you know I love you, right?" And I go, "Yes, ma'am." She'd go, "Okay." That was it.
So you didn't get male nurturance from your father, and
No.
the nurturance you got from your mother was not necessarily feminine in that it
No.
was huggy and
No.
kissy. It was,
Yeah.
I love you, and
Yeah.
and don't you forget it.
Yeah. And I wonder sometimes if she refrained from that because he was not there. She didn't want me to become weak, or in her mind weak, or whatever. I think she felt an obligation to make me strong. She used to always say, "Only the strong survive. Only the strong survive."
Yeah.
And so when I was 16, Dad said he wanted to come get me. He was living in Detroit. Mom said, "If that's what you want to do." I said, "Yes." Dad came down, picked me up. He had his convertible, and we were going to paint the town red. And so we went way out to some place that I didn't know existed. And it was a big house. And I didn't know at the time, but I think it was like a brothel, because all the women there were like, it was all adults, and
My
it was
goodness.
booze and smoking and women, and and when you're 16, with your friends, you're always bragging about what,
Sure.
about your male prowess.
Right.
But when you stick a 16-year-old in the company of adults,
Right.
who are very experienced, I was like completely
Fish
out of my
water.
element.
Yeah.
And the ladies were so kind. They were like, "Good, look at here." They called me fresh fish. So I was sitting there, and Dad disappeared off into wherever he was at. And so she said, one of the ladies said, "Why don't you go outside and play basketball with the kids down the street and come back a little later?" I said, "Okay." So I went down there. I played ball until it got dark. And I'm thinking, man, me and Dad was supposed to be doing stuff. I'm down here playing ball. I play ball all the time with. That was kind of disappointing. But after a while, people were leaving, and so I walked back up to the house, and they were cleaning up the booze, and they were cleaning the house up, and I was like, "So have y'all seen Delbert?" That was my dad. And they said, "Delbert?" And they said, "Yeah." I said, "Yeah." They said, "Delbert gone back to Detroit." So,
Oh my goodness.
so he had apparently got drunk, forgot I was with him, and he just left and went back home. And so this was before cell phone. So I had to ask one of the ladies if they could call my mother, and I had to call my mother, and she was asking where I was. I said, "I don't know where I am. Dad's gone." And she had to find out where I was and came and got me, and she was super hot.
Sure.
But she never, now one thing I will say, my mother never badmouthed my dad. As much as she was frustrated with, the way he did and what he did, she never badmouthed him. And so, we came on back home. But that was the first, I would say, shattering of the glass of this idea that I want to be with Dad, and Dad is great. And
Right.
that was such a disappointment that I think that was my first real dose of reality.
So she didn't need to badmouth him because
She didn't
you
need
found out for yourself.
And that's always the better.
Yeah.
That's always the better.
Yeah.
Because when another parent, when they badmouth,
Yes.
then now you're thinking, well, maybe that's because she's mad at him.
Right, because any child wants to defend their parent.
Sure.
You know, they love their parent
Sure.
and think that you are attacking somebody they love.
Exactly.
And so naturally your response is not as good as it'll be
Exactly.
by having your own eyes opened
Exactly.
as to how poor of a parent
Yeah.
your father was.
Right.
This is such a riveting story. I mean, your story is so powerful. I am without doubt that someone is impacted by Bishop Kevin's story. There's a lot more to it, and we've just scratched the surface, friends. So we're going to take a time out, and when we'll come back, we'll go into some more of Bishop Kevin's story, and probably need to schedule a part 2 to this one because there is just so much there, I'm sure, and we've just begun.
Yeah.
So stay with us. This is the Fathering Strong podcast. Eli Williams here with Kevin McCready, and we'll be back with more after this timeout.
Looking to be the best dad you can be? The Fathering Strong podcast is your guide. Hosted by Pastor Eli Williams. Each episode features inspiring conversations with dads who are making a difference. Learn valuable strategies for building strong families, tackle tough fatherhood issues, and get motivated to be your best self. Never miss an episode. Subscribe to the Fathering Strong podcast on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts. Your subscription helps us provide free services and resources to families in need. Don't wait. Subscribe to the Fathering Strong podcast today and join our community of dads committed to building strong families. Together, let's make a difference.
Welcome back to the Fathering Strong podcast. Eli Williams here. We are delighted and actually enthralled with the story of Kevin McCready, who's my guest today. And I know you're waiting with bated breath to hear more of this, so I'm going to be quiet and turn it back over. So we kind of left off before the break with you sharing the story of this great disappointment that your father's abandonment, literal abandonment of you was, the impact that had on you in opening your eyes to the situation without your mother ever having bad-mouthed him.
Right.
That's important to say because the tendency and the temptation is for the good parent,
Sure.
you know, the one who's there, the custodial parent, to talk bad about the parent who is the one that's making the mistakes and not showing up and telling lies and all of that. That usually is not a good thing for that child to hear.
Right.
And I have found in my own experience and in working with a lot of fathers is that those children who grow up having had their idea of who their other parent is poisoned, so to speak, by them, sometimes that backfires. Backfires.
Yes, it does.
Yeah. So say more about your life from that point forward, because you've got a great story in how your life turned out. So let's begin to tell the story of how you went from what honestly we can say was a horrible experience growing up.
Yeah.
And yet your life turned out pretty well.
Yeah. Well, and let me just say this. Along the way, you as a child, you develop coping mechanisms. You rationalize things. What you don't realize is the impact that it's having on you mentally and emotionally. And I will say that my mother and my father got married young. My mother was a preacher's daughter, come from a very sheltered environment. My father was the bad boy on the other side of the tracks. And so when she married him, their plans were to just wild out. You know, she was like, you know, I'm done with
total
church.
rebellion.
I'm done with the church. And that was their plan. And then she got pregnant with me. And she said, has always said, that I was a blessing for her because the pregnancy slowed her down long enough for the Lord to change her heart. Mm-hmm. And so because of the way she was raised, she refrained from partying and all that while she was pregnant, and start going to church again. Mm-hmm. And so shortly after I was born, she gave her life to Christ. And now that created a crisis because my father felt like, you broke the deal. We were going to paint the town red. Now you done got into this church thing. And so that created friction too.
Yes.
And Dad felt like the church, was his enemy. Mm-hmm. And so that added to the tension. And so when Mom and I left, and she moved back to Akron, of course, she was with her family. Now she's getting more and more entrenched into her foundation, into her upbringing, to the church. So that became more of my life as well. And so in my late teens, I was very angry. I was very driven by that anger. From 16 on, Dad was now a negative thing. Mm-hmm. And I felt like he wasn't there because he didn't want to be there. I didn't feel like his alcoholism was an excuse. Because you have to remember, his family lived in Akron. We lived in Akron. He lived in Detroit. So there'd be times when I would see some of his family, they say, oh, your dad was down here last week. Well, he didn't come to see me. He came to see his family. So that further enraged me.
Sure.
And I remember very clearly, we were living in Akron. My aunt had moved in with us from Cleveland. So it was my mother, my aunt, myself. I was 19. And, I was, you couldn't tell me nothing. I could.
You're grown now.
I was grown. Mm-hmm. I was, I wrestled, I boxed, I was,
Yeah.
And, so there was a whole ruckus. It was a loud going on. My aunt came and tapped me and she said, you're going to have to go downstairs. Your dad is here. Your mother and father are at it again. And so all this time now, when I was wrestling and boxing, I was preparing myself for one day, I'm going to have it out with this guy. And I knew I had to be physically, because again, my dad was very physical. And so I didn't get into boxing because I liked boxing. Got into boxing because, Dad boxed. And I knew I had to know how to box. I didn't get into wrestling because I liked wrestling. I got into wrestling because it made me more efficient. Mm-hmm. And so 19 came, and this ruckus. So I jumped up, put my pants on, came downstairs. My dad, my mom were arguing, pushing. And so I told him, I said, outside, I need to talk to you. Outside. So now me and Dad are standing out on the porch. And I said, I start reading them the riot act. You never been there for me, and blah, blah, blah. And now this is my house. I'm the man of this house. You're not going to disrespect. And I was expecting Dad to swell up because I was swelling up.
Yeah, were you about the same in size?
Oh, no. My dad is 5'10", about 185 pounds.
So you had outgrown
I'm
him.
6'1", about 210 at the time. I'm benching over 300 pounds. I'm all that at 19, right?
Yeah.
And so I was ready for that confrontation. And he did something I had never seen him do. He started crying. And it completely disrupted. Because my dad never showed pain. he got hit in the head once when I was younger. They were playing cards, and they got in an argument. He punched the guy and broke his jaw and kicked everybody at the house. And so that evening, he said, let's go to the movies. So we went to the movies. After the movies, we were standing on the corner in Boston. It was snowing. Waiting for the taxi. The guy came up behind him and hit him in the head with a car jack.
Ouch.
Split his head open. We went to the hospital. My dad had me sit there while they stitched his head up with no
anesthetic.
He said, this is what a man is.
Mm.
And he got 57 stitches in his head without one shot, and made me sit there and watch him. So that was his mindset. So I just knew he was going.
That was the one time you saw him in pain, you're saying?
No, that was the time I saw him in pain, how he handled pain.
Got it.
So what I'm saying is, when he started crying, I wasn't used to this. I had never seen my dad show no weakness. Crying was weakness. So he started crying. He said, I'm sorry, son, I love you, right? Well, what do you do when a person starts, I'm like, I love you too, man, but you can't keep doing this. And so he opened up his arms to hug me. So I went to hug him, and he hit me in the ribs and shattered my ribs. and right? And so that was a terrible, terrible battle. And he left. And what I took from that is, you never trust a person when they say they love you. Love is a weapon. And so I recovered from that physically, but not emotionally.
Of course.
So, quite naturally, you carry those things in. Now I meet a young lady.
Absolutely.
You know what
Absolutely.
I'm saying?
They call that, and I'm sure you know, adverse childhood experiences.
Yeah,
and even when you were 19 then?
At 19.
That's still an adverse childhood experience. So you're taking all of that into your relationship.
Yeah, and I got married 2 years later. I met my wife. She was in the church, just as sweet as she wanted to be. And she met me, and I was very nice. But my father was nice, but his problem didn't start till he was drinking. I was nice, but I didn't need drink to shift. And I always tell people, I had to battle with the spirit of rage. People go, oh, I have a quick temper. That's a completely different thing. I had to battle with the spirit of rage, which had been deposited in me years ago.
Yes.
And it was a stronghold now. And so rage was my first reaction to everything. And it went from 0 to 100. And so when I got married, my wife had no idea of the anger.
No premarital counseling.
The premarital counseling was no premarital counseling.
Well,
no.
the reason I'm
it's
parking,
so necessary.
Yeah, that's the reason I'm parking there, so that our listeners, our viewers, I will not, as a minister, I will not marry a couple if they have not had
myself either.
Premarital counseling, because these two people don't really know each other. They might think they do.
Exactly. They only know what the person has allowed them to see.
Exactly.
And I'll go even one further. When I counsel people, they can't come to me with their marriage date set, because I tell them, if you already got the date set, then whatever we discover during the counseling, you're not going to change nothing.
Right.
You need to counsel first and then set the date once you know that you're compatible.
If you still set the date.
Exactly. And so, but back in those days, they just say, well, you got a problem, come to the altar.
Right.
Right. And pray through it.
Yeah.
And so there was no marriage counseling, not from the pastor, nor did the couples, because let me tell you another thing. You didn't sit with your wife in church because they called you henpat.
Yeah.
So, you had to go through this, anyway, there were a lot of things that thank God we survived and learned, and we don't duplicate. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, we've learned from them, and we do better.
Them. Yeah,
we do better.
Yeah, and go
Bishop,
ahead.
this is excellent.
I don't know.
So it's excellent. Your story is touching on so many things that Fathering Strong is all about.
Oh, beautiful.
So many things. I mean, from helping men be the best version of themselves so that they can be the best spouse, the best parent that they can be. And we offer resources to help them to do that. Your story just brings all of that so out front and center as to the need for an emphasis on working with males to help them to be the best fathers they can eventually be for their children.
Right.
Otherwise, they're going to bring all of those experiences, all of that bitterness that we get quite naturally, if it's not dealt with through healing, through forgiveness and spiritual renewal and all of that, then they're going to take it right into their parenting as well. So there's just so much to your story that we need to impact, that I'm going to ask you, implore you to join us for a second episode of the Kevin McCready story.
Oh my goodness.
For Fathering Strong. Tell every man you know, women too, to tune in to our next installment of the Fathering Strong podcast, because there is something they need to hear, and they need to hear the whole story. And at the end of it, they need to hear what it was that changed this man's life so that it has turned out as well as it has, because he's a great father. He has had a tremendous impact on a number of churches and individuals and school systems and all of that. Kevin McCready, thank you for joining us for this installment of the Fathering Strong podcast. Listen, subscribe to our YouTube channel so that you receive notification of the release of each one of these episodes. Just go to YouTube, Fathering Strong, FatheringStrongYouTube.com, and find our channel, subscribe. That does two things. And not only make sure you get notifications about the release of these podcasts, you also will help us to be able to provide our services free of charge to fathers and families. So FatheringStrong.com is where you can find our website and all the resources, our blog posts, our courses, books, devotionals, all kinds of things that will be a benefit to you as a parent. Go there and subscribe now to the Fathering Strong YouTube channel. I'm Eli Williams. Thank you, Bishop McCready,
for the opportunity to come.
Join us next time for the Fathering Strong podcast.
God bless you.
Appreciate you.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us on another episode of the Fathering Strong podcast. We hope you found the conversation inspiring and helpful. To make sure you don't miss out on future episodes, subscribe to the Fathering Strong podcast on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts. Just search for Fathering Strong in your favorite app. The Fathering Strong podcast is brought to you by Urban Light Ministries, a nonprofit organization with a 3-decade legacy dedicated to turning the hearts of fathers to their children. Thanks to your support, we're able to keep this podcast and many other resources free for dads everywhere. To learn more about Urban Light Ministries or to donate and help us continue this important work, visit urbanlight.org. The Fathering Strong podcast is a production of Urban Light Ministries. Eli Williams is your host, and Bruce Stapleton of the Momentum Group is the producer and engineer. Our theme music is provided by saxophonist Harold Rayford.